experience and on the view of his answers to us that he cannot really measure a significant increase of populations or inmates population after that bill is implemented, what is your own answers to that conclusion of the commissioner? You know, he's not, he's a responsible, very responsible person. He's the head of the federal penitentiaries in this country.
The point of the bill is to jail people. And the point of the bill is to jail people for periods of time in excess of the time in which you'd get provincial sentences. In other words, anything over 2 years, you get a federal sentence. So it boggles the mind to think that there won't be an impact on the costs associated with the correctional system. Certainly we see from the experience of the United States that in effect their regime of mandatory minimum sentences have essentially bankrupted their prison systems, whilst also leading to conditions of incarceration that are, in my submission, inhumane and violative of people's human rights. Ms. Belle-Isle talked about 7 times the rate of HIV within prison, and in the general population, 30 times the rate of Hep C. There's violence in prison. Prison are recruiting grounds for gangs. Prisons don't teach you how to reintegrate into society. They do exactly the opposite. And in my submission, we should be looking for ways to keep people out of prison, not to put them there. But to suggest that this is somehow not going to affect the budgets of the correctional services, perhaps that wasn't the witness's suggestion. It was that they don't have data. The point's to put people in prison. Of course that's going to cost money.
In fairness to him, I think it was that he did not have hard data and was unwilling to hazard an informed guess.
Much like I say the Minister of Justice didn't have any hard data.
I want to argue with you. I will quote his answers. I don't have it with me. But I will quote his answers. What he said that he had data was about Bill C-25. It was a clear answer from him that he had data, but he didn't want to release. But on this one, it was not at all the answers. And I remember very well the arguments I had with him. I said, if you state this, and after 2 years of review, we come with the figures, then your credibility will be at stake, and that's what I said to him. But I don't want to have an argument between the chair, and of course that's not the purpose, but it's essentially to try to understand the impact of this bill on the inmate population.
Well, I can tell you that when this bill was formerly called C-26, and I had a chance to testify in front of the House of Commons in regards to that bill, it's largely unchanged, as you all know. The Justice Minister of British Columbia at the time estimated that this would lead to 700 more imprisonments per year, and he actually estimated and made public comments that it might mean the need to build extra prisons in order to, because our prisons are already overloaded. Additionally, he had concerns that this would actually displace more violent criminals. In other words, we'd be putting non-violent drug offenders in beds or in jail cells that might otherwise better serve more violent criminals. And so I have no doubt that this would have an impact, and that certainly was the testimony of our Justice Minister at the time and his public statements.
If I can move to another question to Madame Leung. Vous avez témoigné au sujet.
You did say something about the number of prisoners who may have AIDS or hepatitis C. I'd like to know whether you have any precise figures relating to the prison population, the federal prison population. You talked about 20% of the prisoners who may be living with AIDS. Could you have the precise figures? I don't think that I did mention that it was 20%, the figure that I was given, and this comes from Correctional Services in Canada. They themselves say that in the federal penitentiaries there are 7 to 10 times more cases of HIV than in the general population, and there are 30 more cases of hepatitis C. This is the only figure that I have right now, but it does come from government sources. Can you tell me whether someone who has AIDS or hepatitis C is able to use marijuana in prison with a prescription from a health practitioner? No, unfortunately not. And there are some cases where we've attempted to defend a person's right to do this in prison, but this is not the case. It has not been approved. What they are given is pharmaceutical synthetic products of THC that people don't like to use because, as one of the witnesses mentioned, when it's TCH pure without the cannabinoids that are included in the plant, this does produce harmful effects. People become more excited, they become more anxious. It's not the same effect as the plant when the plant is used. But marijuana cannot be smoked in prison. This is why people tend to make use of other substances. When we talk about illegal substances, they use it through injection because smoking is not allowed in prisons. And it's not only smoking. Mr. Conway attempted to defend a person who was doing it illegally, who wished to eat it in the form of biscuits or cookies. You cannot consume marijuana in any form in prisons. And this was already challenged before the courts. Yes, it was done so. Mr. Conway did defend one or two cases with that end in mind. Can you tell me how many centers there are, compassion centers that are authorized throughout Canada? I would say about 15. Are you talking about compassion centers? I would say there are about 15 of these centers that are already well established. And there may be 4 or 5 then that are not on such a solid footing. There are 3 or 4 in Vancouver, Victoria, 1 or 2 Montreal, I imagine 2 or 3. Toronto, I think there are 3 of them. But none of them are licensed, none of them are legal. And unfortunately, all the work that we are doing is not regulated by Health Canada, or the federal government, or the provincial government. Are they all liable then to legal proceedings? Yes, they are all subject to this. And as I gave my own example, I was arrested myself for distribution of medical marijuana in my compassion club. And about half, as I said, have suffered raids on the part of the police, about half of them. In your assessment of this program, you come to the conclusion that, as you noted in one of your previous responses, that in proceedings that were undertaken against these clubs, none of them turned out to be successful. I gather then that you believe that if this bill is adopted as such, most of these clubs could in fact be subject to police intervention. There might be confiscation and legal proceedings. Mr. Jacquet, relating to Bill C-15, said that the day after you pass this bill, if the police show up, then it will be a 3-year mandatory minimum sentence for Mr. GK and all those who are working from a mandatory minimum sentence, because a school has been just built a few streets down from their facility. The same is true for my employees, a mandatory minimum of 2 or 3 years. The judges will not be able to take any discretionary measures. And this club produces marijuana for 5,000 people. Ours does for 1,000 people. So this means far more people will be affected in Victoria and Vancouver than in the entire Canadian program under Health Canada. This will be a huge impact.